Kia ora whānau, government debt is our savings. Let's look at how the New Zealand government issues our sovereign currency. So here we are, is the government, the currency issuer, working with its agent, the Reserve Bank. Down below there is the rest of us, the economy, our whānau communities, our businesses. Here's my marae Oparure. Here's my whānau, kia ora whānau. And there to the right, the bottom right there is our marae budget, or it may be an individual budget or a household budget or a business budget. The distinction between the two here is clear, the currency issuer and the currency users. Before we start down the sequence of how government spends and invests into the economy, it's important to recognise that taxes do not pay for this next exercise that we're going to do. It's important to get that distinction clear. So at any time you can click back onto the site and view our course. Taxes don't pay for anything. Because the government is the currency issuer, it doesn't rely on taxes to fund government investment in the economy or government spending. You'll learn later in that program taxes don't pay for anything. The real purpose is behind what taxation is for. Let's start this process, look at how the government invests into the economy. Cabinet, working with the Minister of Finance and the Minister's agency, the Treasury, also works with the Reserve Bank. The easiest way to view the Reserve Bank is like any other bank. Banks have accounts there, but the difference is the Reserve Bank banks the bank. So even though we don't have an account there, our banks do. Also, the Treasury has bank accounts there. Also, central banks from countries around the world, particularly our trading partners, have accounts there. And other commercial banks from around the world have accounts at our Reserve Bank. The Reserve Bank is the dollar scorekeeper. It maintains the payment system. If you like, it maintains the spreadsheet of dollars at the government level and out into the economy. Let's look at how this works. Let's imagine that you bank with the Pink Bank, which has an account at the Reserve Bank. Now, government then, working through Treasury, instructs the Reserve Bank to mark up your bank's bank account for you. Let's say, for instance, in this purpose, example would be to pay your pension or a government benefit. So the account is marked up at the Reserve Bank, which then is connected to your bank account. You are then able to access your pension or benefit payment. Then you have the option to save or spend thereafter. Here's another example. Let's imagine that you are a roading contractor and this is your bank that you as a roading contractor bank with, and that bank has an account at the Reserve Bank. Treasury instructs the Reserve Bank to mark up the appropriate bank account. Then you, as the roading contractor, get on and build the roads or the bridges that you've been contracted to build by the government. Get on with that. Then let's just say Hataka Institute has a brilliant idea for soil carbon farming across New Zealand. Let's just say the government wants to invest in that idea. Cool. So Treasury then instructs the Reserve Bank to mark up a suitable bank account, which is ours, and our bank. Hataka then is able to access those funds to carry out our soil carbon farming. You can learn a bit more about that back on our site, soil carbon water storage. Just a little plug there for our initiative. But thanks, government, for the investment. We appreciate it. That's how the payment system works. So Treasury, working with the Reserve Bank where all the accounts are. Remembering that the Reserve Bank banks the banks and it is the keeper of the spreadsheet. It is the maintainer of the payment system. Another way in which currency can be produced, dollars can be created, is through bank credit creation. You can view that back on our website in the short course called Banks Create Money. However, all commercial banks, trading banks that we know are in effect agents of the government because they operate strict regulation from the regulator Reserve Bank. However, you'll learn in that course that banks are not intermediaries. They do not transfer money from the government to you. They're actually creators of the money supply. You'll learn that in bank credit creation in the course. Banks create money. Moving forward now to the operations of the Reserve Bank. As we mentioned, it's the scorekeeper of the dollars. It maintains the payment system. It issues around 3% of our currency, which is the notes and coins that we used to seeing. And obviously, in modern times, that percentage will largely be reduced as well as we move more towards digital payment systems. So 97% of the currency is issued through digital dollars, and that, again, you can learn about in our short course, Banks Create Money, back on the side. The Reserve Bank's job is to maintain monetary policy, financial stability, to regulate the banks. But let's look now at the whakapapa of sovereignty, which we covered briefly back in our program, whaanau, and sovereignty. But the whakapapa means basically the sequence, the creation point, on with the development. Whakapapa, or papa is short for papa tuanaku, the earth mother. So there's the sequence and sovereignty, the natural order of things. So the sequence starts firstly with the government levying taxes. Levying of the taxes causes people to be going about seeking employment to produce goods and services. Once the tax levies are then issued upon the society, then taxes can be paid with that currency. So, government first levies taxes, then spends the New Zealand dollar as the tax credit. It's the only legal thing that's accepted in payment of New Zealand taxes. This investment in the tax levy and then the spend into the economy is accounted for as a government deficit. Government deficits are the amount of dollars the government has invested in the economy or into us. It's the flow of dollars from the creation point out into the economy. Government debt is a record or score of those deficits over time. Government debt is a score of the dollars in the economy that have not yet been used to pay taxes. In effect, our savings. Government debt is our savings. So another term for government debt would be to say it's our savings. Now, common fear is, but doesn't government have to pay that debt back? Are we going to have to owe it to China or the United States, and we're going to leave all this debt to our grandkids? Around about election time, this fear-mongering tends to take hold and be quite prevalent. We want to clarify that through this short course. Does government have to pay their debt back? No, because there's nothing to actually pay back, because the debt is money as New Zealand dollars in accounts at the Reserve Bank. Those dollars are owned by savers like us, invested into what are called Treasury Bills or securities or bonds. Our savings earning interest. So there's nothing to pay back because the debt is already there at our own Reserve Bank as dollars in accounts owned by savers like us called Treasury Bills or securities or bonds. Our savings earning interest. When those Treasury Bills or securities, our savings, come due, the Reserve Bank switches them to another type of account, a current account or a reserve account, going from savings to basically what's a check account. Treasury and Reserve Bank staff keep track of our savings as reserves switched from being Treasury Bills. So the savings are in Treasury Bills and then they get switched into reserve accounts. This entry of our savings on the government records is called public debt, or government debt. Throughout the rest of this course, we'll see that those are actually misnomers and quite misleading terms. So this entry of our savings on the government records is called public debt or government debt. So therefore, the government debt is our savings. This next scenario I'd like to outline for you all occurs inside the Reserve Bank, inside the banking system. So as I mentioned, our banks have accounts at the Reserve Bank. Some of our banks, the larger investment banks for instance, are also what are called primary counterparties. And they are able to participate in what are called government bond options. So those banks within the Reserve Bank have accounts similar to savings or cheque accounts. They just have different terms. Savings earn interest, cheque accounts are for transactions, treasuries, securities, bonds are the savings account, if you like, and the cheque accounts are the reserve or current account. So even though we don't bank at the Reserve Bank, our banks do. They hold these different types of accounts at the Reserve Bank, these different purposes. Let's go through a scenario on how this works. You can see them as savings or as a cheque account. So let's say, for instance, that the government working with the Reserve Bank wants to conduct what's called a reserve drain. What that means is the Reserve Bank is wanting to, the government is wanting to move reserves, dollars out of the economy for a couple of different purposes. For example, to reduce inflation and to support the central bank to hit its interest rate target, or the OCR, or the official cash rate. So in order for the Reserve Bank to be able to follow its mandate and to stabilise and monitor inflation and to set the official cash rate, they can't just announce a figure, it actually has to conduct reserve drains. Now let's imagine that the reserve drain occurs. The important thing to note right at the very beginning, the draining of reserves out of the economy is not at all to fund the government. Remember, the government is the currency issuer. It spends these dollars into existence. The government does not require these reserves to fund its operations or to fund public expenditure. It's an important distinction to make. Also, what's commonly used is the term government borrowing. Again, the government is the currency issuer. So in my view, this is a misnomer. The government isn't required to borrow off us in order for it to fund public expenditure. This process of borrowing that we'll see here, the issuing of treasuries or bonds, is purely to operate a reserve drain. So again, that's a misnomer. Operating the reserve drain enables the government to monitor the flow of dollars in and out of the economy. So for instance, an example of a reserve drain is taxation. Funds coming from the economy back into government. Another example are bonds, issuing of bonds or government bond markets. Sometimes called securities. In New Zealand, we term these Treasury Bills. In the United States, for instance, they're called Treasury securities. In Japan, the Japanese central bank operate what are called KGBs or Japanese government bonds. But they all have the same purpose of acting as a reserve drain in the economy. So this is how it works. Our bank operating, if our bank is a primary counterparty, then is able to participate in government bond options, purchase these treasury bills. That process of taxation is a fiscal process. This process is a monetary process. So our bank participates in the auction and purchases treasury bills. That then purchase causes reserves to leave the economy. Now let's just say we have options. Here, as the Treasury bills are purchased, interest is generated on those Treasury bills. That's the incentive behind participating in these government bond auctions. Let's say, for example, it's a 12-month Treasury bill. We have options here, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. Let's just say, for argument's sake, let's follow the track of a 12-month Treasury bill. So during those 12 months, interest is able to be earned on those Treasury bills. Then when the due date arrives, the end of the 12 months, all that occurs is the dollars then are switched from the savings or the bond account over to the equivalent of a checking account. Just again, when the bills come due, the Reserve Bank just switches between accounts from savings to checking or reserve accounts, as we call them. So that process can occur at any time. And also, these bond options can occur several times during the year. They get announced, and our banks participate in those bond options to purchase those Treasury bills. So those Treasuries then served as basically a savings account for people wanting to save and invest in those Treasury bills. From the government standpoint, it operates as a reserve drain. So just to summarise, when we, operating through our banks who are primary counterparties, we purchase Treasury bills, it's seen commonly in our common knowledge and what we're taught is that this is government borrowing. I hold that it's a misnomer. The government doesn't need to borrow us. That's what you perceive the government is doing, to borrow for the purposes of public expenditure. The government doesn't need to borrow. It is the currency issuer. It's doing this just to operate a reserve drain. Other terms that commonly use, government debt, and also public debt. The easiest way to imagine this for us is all of those things are basically our savings. When these Treasury bills are purchased, we earn interest on those bills, which is the incentive for us to allow our dollars to leave the economy. In exchange, we earn interest over that period of time. So important for us to recognise government issuing Treasury bills, bonds or securities, is simply operating a reserve drain to assist the central bank in hitting its mandated inflationary and OCR targets. Also, the bond market is attractive to savers because in effect it's like a basic income for people who already have money. What this marketplace is basically a hangover or an anachronism from the gold standard days when we used to be on a fixed currency or fixed to the gold standard. What governments would do in the Treasury marketplace by establishing that marketplace is allow them to incentivize people to put their money into savings to prevent them from cashing their money in for gold. So not, in essence, a cash in, but take the dollars in to exchange for gold. If that all happened at once, then the government could possibly run out of its gold stocks and effectively become insolvent or bankrupt. So the whole Treasury marketplace, or what are called treasuries or bonds or securities, the government bond marketplace, is really an anachronism from the gold standard days. And in effect, is nowhere near as effective as operating fiscal policy. So this process here that you're seeing is actually outdated. It's not actually necessary. The tool that should be used, where we find that governments around the world use this process here as an excuse to prevent them from really operating proper fiscal policy, which is government spending and taxation. So government debt is our savings. Around about election time, we'll have politicians from all sorts of different parties raising alarm bells and big red numbers, government debt. What are we going to do about this government debt? I'm hoping that you've learned so far that that is mischaracterized. For instance, government debt in 2020 is around about $60 billion. Now, instead of being scaremongered into thinking, well, we're going to have to pay all that back to China and the US and leave all this to our grandkids, it's important to look at the facts, understand what this means for us, for the rest of the economy. The government debt, $60 billion, is our savings of $60 billion. So if the big red numbers alarm you, then don't look at it that way. Just purely view it as our savings. Cool, sweet. I reckon, congratulations. Yes, good on you, New Zealand. Savings of $60 billion. The government debt is a scoreboard of our savings or surplus. It's like a digital scoreboard at a rugby match. And the job of the central bank is to maintain that scorecard or that spreadsheet. So the government neither has money or doesn't have money. It's purely operating a scoreboard or a scorecard of the government surpluses or deficits, private sector surpluses or deficits. It's purely a scoreboard. Let's take a look at this in reality. Here are the New Zealand sector balances from back since 1985 to now in 2020. This is the scoreboard and how it operates. So you'll see there in the middle, that's the middle point there. Above there is a surplus, below is a deficit. The yellow line is the government, the green line is us, the rest of the economy, the private sector. Government is the public sector, we are the private sector. The pink line in the middle is just the average for the rest of the world. Let's see how this works. So you notice here around about 1991, the government was operating a deficit. This means that it was taxing more dollars out of the economy, running a reserve drain out of the economy, more than it was spending into the economy. So the government operated at a deficit. And you can see correspondingly at that same time, because the deficit is operating by government, not investing those dollars into the economy, which then means the investment becomes our surplus. So the government is spending into the economy more than it's taking out of its reserve drain or taxes. The government deficit is our surplus. Moving on, you see there around about 1995, the government changed its mind and now moved to a government surplus. This means that the government was operating under a surplus where it was spending less than it was draining out of the economy, taxation or any other reserve drain. At the same time as it runs a surplus, you can see correspondingly we're operating the rest of the economy at a deficit because the currency can only be in one of two places. If the government holds it and runs it a surplus, doesn't invest it into the economy, the rest of the economy goes into a deficit. Government surpluses, our deficit. And you can see here the government maintained a surplus up here right up to 2005. And correspondingly, you can see the complete mirror image. We're now still operating at a deficit. For those within society who are the most vulnerable, when the government operates a surplus, meaning that there's less available of the currency, the dollars out into the economy, the private sector has to go get those dollars from somewhere, which is normally going to finance companies and banks to get access to funds plus interest. So you can see how pervasive it is if the government persists in trying to operate at a surplus. Again, you can see here there's a switch now. You see the government has now gone from a surplus and gone down into a deficit. Now that correspondingly causes the private sector, us, to go into a surplus. So thanks for investing in us, government debt, enables us to operate at a surplus. So the government deficit is our surplus. Then it switched back again, so the government's gone back into its surplus, which correspondingly means the mirror image, we're at a deficit. I hope that's very clear between the difference of the government and as a currency issuer, us as the currency user. So government operating in the black or the surplus is our deficit. When the government operates in the red or at a deficit, it's our surplus. Next time you hear a politician advertising the fact that they want to run the government at a surplus, you have to understand that that means we're at a deficit. The currency can only be in one of two places, with the issuer or out here with the currency users. Look at this graph now. You see government deficits and debt moving up to January 2020. So as the government deficit is rising, that means it's investing more into the economy. So the question, what would this corresponding reduction be? So as government deficits go up, more spending by the government into the economy, what is correspondingly going down? It is unemployment, which shows a relationship there. If the government invests more into the economy, we can achieve employment. So unemployment reduces as government deficits go up, basically showing that unemployment is an unspent income story. If we want to have gain employment and achieve full employment, the currency must be issued by the government. Now, what is a sign that government has not spent enough dollars into the economy? It's quite simply what we saw, unemployment. You will learn back on our course site, a website that shows our short course, Sheepdog Full Employment. I invite you to pop back onto the site at your own time to review that course, to explain the difference here when the government spends and it doesn't. Basically, it shows that full employment can be achieved simply by spending into the economy until full employment reaches its upper limit. Government deficits are not a sign of excessive spending. Inflation is. In our short course, taxes don't pay for anything. You'll learn a bit more about what inflation actually is. But to avoid inflation risk and unemployment, government can invest into productive activities that produce new goods and services and jobs. Basically what I would term GDP transactions. This is investment into productive items and productive activities. Create all the good stuff that we need, new jobs and goods and services. So what are those good things? You can see here it's healthcare, education, infrastructure. It may be investment into new healthy food production systems. It may be soil carbon farming, water storage. It may be green tech environmental goals. The main point here to realise is that all of these good things we need for our economy. Currency can only come from one place. How can we afford the good things? This is the question that's always put on the table. I hope that this short course has enabled you to throw that question off the table and ask better questions. How can we afford the good things? Anything we can do, we can afford. To afford it is just to be able to do it. If we work with the natural resources that we have available, they are the only restrictions upon our development. There are no financial restrictions when we operate a sovereign fiat currency system. If we're able to invest in goods and services to reduce inflationary risk and invest in other items such as healthcare, which is actually deflationary, these types of items enable us to operate a prosperous society. But first, we must get confusion between throttle, the gas pedal, meaning, and the handbrake. You get those mixed up. I hope this course has helped clarify that for you. The only limitations are skills, a desire to work, time, and the natural resources that are available to us. There's absolutely no financial constraint on our development. Government debt is our savings. I invite you to pop through an email back onto the site. Just click on the email link and let's chat soon. Kia ora tātou te whānau.